Charmine and Annette, and we're going to talk about dystopian and social science fiction. So either one of you guys, maybe I'll hand it off to Charmine first, and then I'll kind of like rotate. So if you had to explain what social science fiction was, how would you describe it to somebody who doesn't know what it is?
Dealing with the social issues, the science fiction genre that deals with the social issues, social matters, a lot of justice, and how society is treated.
Yeah, I think it's definitely using the genre of science fiction to tackle social issues. And it's funny that this is, I think this week is only second in my favorites to like horror. Like I really love the horror week, as Annette knows. But this is like my second favorite. And it's funny because last semester I taught an American Lit class and the entire focus was social justice and social issues. So we talked about like racism, classism, sexism, all that stuff. And it was so horrible. Like it was so hard. I mean, it's already hard enough to talk to people about that and, you know, have a computer screen, and it just makes it infinitely more difficult. And so I decided, no, I just want to go to space. I want to get out of here. Like, let's go elsewhere. And then it's like, I find myself exactly in the same position again. because these people who are writing this, like they are living our life, like they're living life on Earth. And so science fiction is just a kind of mechanism to talk about that, right? So specifically, what is a dystopia? Like, how would you describe a dystopia, Annette?
Actually, I didn't read. I mean, I read it now, but I didn't read it at first before I watched everything to kind of give me a different outlook on what it was. And at first, I thought it was about women getting pregnant unwillingly. Basically, that's what I thought it was.
Oh, the Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah. Well, and then even Mad Max. Like, I thought it was like basically breeding. That's what I thought it was about. But then once I went back and looked at it, I just basically understood that it was a like an unfortunate event. Like I said, it's not happiness. It's like the worst of the worst that could possibly happen.
Yeah, like a utopia is the complete opposite of that, and that comes from like Thomas More, who he actually wrote a book called Utopia, and it was like everything was a perfect thing. And a dystopia is the very opposite of that, where it's the you know, like let's take something that's not quite good and then take it to its like most extreme conclusion. So yeah, so I think that's definitely what's happening. What did you guys think of the article about young adult dystopias? Did you guys get to read that?
I've read 2 out of 3 of those books, and you know, seen all the movies out of 2 of those series. I didn't agree with it.
You didn't? Yeah, why? Tell me why not. Yeah, why didn't you agree with it?
Just because to me it was like his focus was talking about how we're teaching our children to go against society. No, to me the stories were about, you know, like I go back to that first movie that we watched about the robots killing the robots with Harrison Ford. I can't remember that first movie that we watched. Blade? Was it Blade? No, I don't remember what that name is.
That's all right.
Anyways, that first one where it's basically like you're following the person who is doing, you know, following the rules by, you know, by the T. And then you get into this one, and I think these books like the Hunger Games and then the Divergent series, and I'm not sure about the Giver. Like I said, I'd never seen that one. Those ones.
Oh, you should definitely read it.
After I read about, you know, that little snippet, I was like, I'm going to read that one. But following those, it's like, okay, you're following the rebel side, not necessarily the people that are following down the line of, like, you know, following the conformity of what the government is telling you to do. So I think it's just a different version. Like, I mean, I don't know. I just don't think that they ever really have. What he was saying was that, oh, you're teaching the kids wrong. No, I don't really see that. I just see that it's showing the rebel side of it, not necessarily following the government side of it.
What about you, Charmaine? Were you able to read that? And if you have any opinions on it, go for it.
Yes, and he was saying that it would teach children to submit to the free market, not fight authority. So I have to agree with Annette, because you want the freedom, but you also are fighting authority, and everything that we read, you know, they are fighting the authority because the authority is wrong.
Yes, that's exactly what I agree with.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I said it at first when I read it, I was like, yay, okay, it's like doing something, but I still think they're doing something good, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because I think it just like, even though I don't necessarily agree with the article, like it made me see things like the Hunger Games in a new way, and kind of like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because like in the Hunger Games, you have the elite people, right, that are from like the districts that are closer to the city, who get like more, and it's like, yeah, so
today's society, we're just putting it on a different technical order. I mean, that's what we have now. People in the government have, more power than we do, than the middle class or the lower class that don't, we don't have access to things that they do. And it's already there. So I don't know what the difference is what he was trying to explain.
Yeah, it got a little muddy towards the end, but it really, I think it kind of got me thinking about the purpose of like YA dystopian fiction. Like, why do we have it? Why is it so popular? Kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's really interesting in that sense. So do you guys have anything more to say about that before we move on, or? No? All right, okay. So let's talk about, I don't know, you pick what you want to talk about next. So we've got The Handmaid's Tale, Harrison Bergeron, Mad Max Fury Road. Which one do you want to kind of dive into?
You know what I would say, because we talked about it before, The Handmaid's Tale.
All right, let's give Charmaine, let's do Charmaine's pick and do The Handmaid's Tale. So Charmaine, can you summarize for me very quickly what it's about? Like, what's the world, just in case like some of our listeners haven't heard about it.
Mm-hmm. So basically, it's called Gilead, that they're getting all the women to breed for the women that are barren. Now, the one thing I didn't quite understand who was who, and maybe it was because of the upper class or different things as such, because I was like, mighty funny, barren, and all the working women have to be the handmaid. So I was like, how did they pick?
Yeah, so basically, like, yeah, so you're right. So basically, society has been overthrown. I think they talk about like it's later, but they talk about how they murdered Congress, which, I mean, that would definitely I think go with how a lot of people feel about Congress right now. But so they murdered Congress or whatever, and then established the nation of Gilead, right, where it's like, and they have complete control, and you have the commanders who are in charge, who are obviously men. This is a patriarchal society, and then the women are given very specific roles, right? So we've got handmaids who are responsible for giving children, like producing children for the commanders. We have wives, right, who are responsible for, like, I guess, running the home and, like, I guess, being a companion to the commander or whatever. And then you've got what are they called? Marthas, right? Who are the servants who do the domestic labor. And so it's just very delineated, like you basically have like the sex function, the wife function, and the caretaker function. But yeah, Annette, what do you want to say?
I think that they took that whole it takes a village to raise a child way out of context.
Yeah, and in this case, it's just like it's kind of bananas, because it's like you're only allowed to be one thing as a woman. And I think that reading that, I don't know,
because we've evolved to so much more than what we were originally intended for.
Yeah, exactly. Just the biological function.
This is your job. This is your job, but I can command everything. So
exactly.
I think that's kind of, it's already here. We're in that process now.
I know, and it's completely horrifying. Like just reading that, where it's like, because Marthas, they're just the domestic workers, so they can't have a marriage, they can't have that companionship. And then wives, they get that companionship, but they have share their husband with another woman. And then the handmaids like don't get any of it, like they don't get a companionship. There's no kind of like emotional love connection. It's just like lay back and think of your country, and to have children. So how do you guys think that this qualifies as dystopian science fiction? Because I know we talked about science fiction and definitions of it, but like how does this qualify as dystopian social science fiction?
I think it was like the conformity of everything. Like even within Hunger Games, it's all about conforming to a set standard in society, and then you you're just following the rules. I mean, that's, to me, that's what I got out of it. It was just like, okay, this is what the rules are. And I think because I read pretty far into the book because it was really interesting.
I'm glad.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna finish it here pretty soon. But I read pretty far into it, and I think she had only had like a 10-year lapse, and I think it really got to me. And I read, I think it was on the encyclopedia part that it talked about the definition of it, saying that um, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
No, you're good. You're good.
Like that it was talking about how that it goes like you're, oh goodness, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm sorry. Anyways, the conformity of it was, that's the main part that I see the dystopia of it. And then, I mean, that it just kind of falls along with everything else. It's the worst of the worst. Oh, that's what it was. The nature of it, the psyche of it, that it kind of like, within 10 years, she lived this free life, living with the husband that I guess it was a husband at that time that she had cheated, or he had cheated on with another woman, and they created a baby, and then they're like living this, a different life. And then not even 10 years later, she's in a totally different situation where the world is totally different. And, you say how high, I mean, you don't really go back to what you like. She's imagining all those things from the past, but she's not trying to go outside of what they're telling her is correct now.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing where you have that scene where she sees the Japanese, or is it the Chinese tourists with the foreign tourists?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And she's like, she's already starting to judge the woman and how she's dressed. Like she's wearing high heels and makeup, and it's like she's kind of slut shaming her in a way in her head. Like, oh, how immodest. And she's like, oh my God, that was me. Like not even a couple years ago as I would have dressed like that. Yeah, Charmaine, do you have anything to say about this, about in terms of how it's social? Like, what do you think it's critiquing socially?
What do I think critiquing socially?
Yeah, what do you think The Handmaid's Tale is critiquing? Like, if it is, like, because we're saying, like, if it is social science fiction, what part of our society that critiquing? Like, what is it commenting on?
A couple of things. I think it's how differently the have and have nots are treated. I've been in Dallas 5.5 years from California, and I think Dallas is one of the most divided cities. So it reminds me of that, like the have and the have nots. Like it's so different from Los Angeles to me with that. And it's also women. What's a woman role, women's rights, because it reminded me of the Stepford Wives when they showed all the women.
Definitely, that's the same thing. Movie.
I was like, they go into the grocery store, they all say the same thing. They say here, the saying, whatever it was, I can't remember now, but they say the same things, they do the same things. And I think it speaks to the despair of women, because although these wealthy women are here, they still have they wear the same clothes, a very particular role. Some of the men are aides on the side, and since I continue to watch the series, it was like they don't even have a relationship, an intimate relationship. So when they did it, they weren't going to do it, and then they did it, and he was like, no. So I think it speaks to the have and the have-nots, and the how women are treated.
Yeah, I think you're definitely spot on there. And I appreciate that I get to talk with women about this, because I think sometimes men are like, well, and I'm like, no, you can't talk about what you don't know about. But it's like, yeah, it just makes my skin crawl, because it's very much about how if we took away women's rights, this could be the world that we live in. This is the world that some women live in some countries where there are no rights for women. Like, I mean, just recently, Saudi Arabia allowed women to drive. Before that, you couldn't drive. You couldn't go really anywhere without a male relative, and so how that limits women's mobility, their access to education and services and all of that stuff. And so it's just so just reading, I think that's why I've really had a problem like sitting down to watch the show, because I'm already so horrified about the state of women's rights in this country today. And I think that's what Margaret Atwood is really kind of hitting on Annette, before you joined us, I was talking to Charmaine about how a lot of conservatives were upset with the series when it came out of The Handmaid's Tale, and they were like, oh, this is an unfair critique of conservatism and yada yada yada, and it's just liberal propaganda that was created to criticize us. And it's like, no, it was written back in 1985. Yeah. It's been around for quite a while. And so yeah, I think it really speaks to our culture, like the function of the handmaid as just a baby maker. And there are a lot of people who feel like that is just what a woman is made for, and that's all she's good for. I remember there was, because you live here in Dallas, Charmaine, or you may remember this, but there was a woman who she was a paramedic, and she had some kind of like brain issue, an embolism or an aneurysm, and she was basically dead, but the hospital kept her alive because she was pregnant. And like, this is beyond what her family wanted, what she wanted. They wanted to go ahead and pull the plug because she had told them many times as a paramedic, like, I don't want to live like that. And they just ignored her wishes. And I think that's the most horrifying thing. And I think that's what The Handmaid's Tale is taking. Conclusion, where it's like, you don't have control over your body anymore and who does what with it. So yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, it's horrible. And the other part that saddened me was that how women are treating each other, right? The wives are treating the horrible, you know, some of the Marthas are treating the handmaids horrible. Some of the handmaids are treating the handmaids horrible.
Yeah, there's this like internalized misogyny, right?
Yeah, I want them to all rise up, like come together and rise up against these
these foolish men. Yeah, Annette, you wanted to chime in there.
I think that there was a part in the actual show that I didn't get out of the book where they're like beating the crap out of this guy for raping one of the handmaidens, and I was like, holy crap, that maybe if they would just do that to the people around them, you know, maybe we
I think that's really fascinating, where it's like, if you keep and this is like going into like feminist theory and stuff like that, but it's this idea of like keeping women separate, you know, like we have to like, that's how the patriarchy work. It's like we keep them separate by race and by class, and so that way they can't join together. Like a white woman can't look at a black woman and see that is my sister, like let us come together. It's just like you're cut along lines, and I think that that's how they keep these women under control. And also the, you know, internalized misogyny, like you were talking about, Charmaine, of the women who you know, treat the handmaids so horribly. And even within, it's such a rat race, and the haves and the have-nots, I think, really play into that, where it's like it's not just gender, it's power and class and hierarchies. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Annette, did you want to say anything else about The Handmaid's Tale? Like, did you come back to your thought before, like, you were derailed?
Yeah, it was just out on the encyclopedia part where it talked about the psyche part. I got to that part of the psyche of it, and it's like it was versus nature versus natural, what was natural to them, and it talked about that, about The Handmaid's Tale, that it seemed like it was natural for the woman to fall into that role without actually fighting it, or you know, or she came from being caught in the woods and then just conformed immediately, but just for the thought of not wanting to get tasered or whatever it was just like the brainwash was immediate, you know. So that was the scariest part.
I think that was a scary part for you.
Yeah, with like the 10-year mark that she had, it was from like, if I look back at 10 years from now, you know, I don't feel like I don't know, like my life is kind of still following along in that line, but I don't know, I guess the 10-year difference is what she kept explaining, like, oh, I was this way 10 years ago. Like, how did you change that much in that amount of time just because of a whip? You know, like, that's what I didn't understand.
It's scary. And I love how in the if you're reading it, like, it reads like that, where it's like all of a sudden she's talking about something and then we're switching to something else. And there's like a real kind of like, even in the narrative structure of it, it's so shattered and it's so fragmented. And I think that really speaks to her trauma, because I think it's very like the Society of Gilead is very cultish, you know? And so it's like, it can happen like that. Like when you are in a situation where you are basically held captive and you can't escape, you're going to acclimate as fast as possible. And I think that that's the reason why these women like we were talking about the wives and the other handmaids who don't treat the other handmaids so well, is like they know what the score is and they're trying to just survive.
Yeah.
So, yeah. What about you, Charmaine? What did you think about her her just fast, the fact that she changed so quickly?
Yeah, it was very surprising because she seemed like such a fighter, you know. Got there, how she ran, how, you know, if you go on into the series, they tell how they tried to, you know, run and hide and different things and such. And she seemed like such a fighter. And when they go back to her story in the cultish matter, I guess you conform to, not like Annette said, get beat with the ladies' eye being taken out, or, you know, that didn't want to do what they wanted. Could be some momentum to not to do what they do.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. I think that it's just I think that that's also a part that's really horrifying reading this as a woman, where it's like, you don't think that that can happen to you. You don't think that you could just change like that. But it's like all of this becomes second nature to her. And I think that that's that moment with the tourists where she's like, I used to dress like that. That's the way I used to be. And it's amazing that I'm so different. And how quickly a kind of ideological change can happen once certain people are in power. And I think we're seeing that now with like the attack on women's rights, like reproductive rights. Like now they want to take away the, what is it, the birth control mandate in Obamacare and stuff, just stuff like that, where they're also like trying to get rid of abortions after 6 weeks. And I mean, and also living here in Texas, like how they, what did they do? They put certain strictures in place where it's like, clinics needed to have the same safety protocols as a hospital, but that wasn't really required. Like there were things where it's like the hallways had to be big enough to allow 2 gurneys to go side by side, and that's like in an abortion clinic where it's like they don't do surgical procedures, they just do like the morning after pill and stuff like that. But it shut down a lot of access to abortions for women, and so women were having to go out of state in order to get reproductive care. And so I think that Margaret Atwood is really speaking to that. Like it seems like even more prescient and pressing now than it was when she wrote it in 1985, when they were dealing with stuff like Roe v. Wade. So yeah, it's interesting. So is there anything else you want to say about that before we kind of move on to the next thing, or it stays with you? It's really haunting. And I was going to tell you, Annette, yeah, totally. I was telling Charmaine earlier, if you enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale, check out Alias Grace. It's also by Margaret Atwood, and it's on Hulu. They made a series about it. And it's about a woman who's a servant. She's a servant, and she ends up murdering her master and his mistress, who is his housekeeper. And it really, I mean, if The Handmaid's Tale is about women losing their rights and what that could mean, Alias Grace is set in the 1900s in Canada, and it's like where women had no rights. You know, like they had no control over their bodies or anything like that. So it's really fascinating. So which thing you want to talk about next? Do you want to talk about Harrison Bergeron or maybe Fury Road?
The Harrison Bergeron, it was weird.
It is strange. It is Kurt Vonnegut.
So I don't really have much to say about that.
Except that it's strange.
Yeah, like the baggage of, you know, handicaps. I was like, what? I was like, I don't understand.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a satire about equality in a weird way, and I think it's interesting that a dude definitely wrote it. There is this kind of, yeah, Charmaine, you hear me, but it's like it's like there's this thing when you start to talk about things like equality, like equal rights for people of color, equal rights for LGBTQIA people and for women, and there's this thing that like white cis hetero men, when you start talking about that, they're like, wait a minute, you're giving those people rights, that means you're taking away my rights.
Oh my goodness.
And so, yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Charmaine? What did you think of the short story? Like,
it was weird too. I read it twice because I was like, did I miss something? How they after I read, I was like, okay, that's it. And the son died, but how they wanted everybody, I guess, to be on an equal. No one could be better or worse than anyone. Which I didn't, agree with, because everybody is different. I mean, I know and like you said, now you said that it's a satire on equality. I see, where they're trying to get. It was just weird, like Annette said. But after I read it, I was like, they want a society, which is dystopia, where they want everybody to be the same and by any means necessary. Society is complete opposite of utopia. I had to read what utopia was too after I read the whole thing, because I was like, now I get it. Because you think of utopia, you think it's happy, perfect, wonderful, like I tell my staff, life is not always about that. And then dystopia is, I just think of the complete opposite. So although they're trying to get to equality, look at how they treat people.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a utopia. Like if you're looking at the world in Harris and Bergeron, they're striving for a utopia, but what they actually end up with is a dystopia, where it's like, we're going to treat everybody the same. Everybody is going to have to think the same and eat the same and be the same physically, when it's just like, yeah, that's probably not the best way to handle that. It's kind of like, it reminds me of social justice conversations I get into on Facebook. I really have to stop doing that. But where you talk about, it's bad. I have to be like, no, step away from the crazy. But, the conversation where it's like, you talk about like women's rights, like we need to work toward women's rights. We need to work towards gay rights and those of, people of color. And they're like, well, why can't we just treat everybody the same? And it just, it's funny because I'm just now making that connection to Harris and Bergeron, because that's the idea kind of taken to its conclusion, where it's like, but it's not about treating everybody the same. It's about making up for years and centuries and so much time of systemic inequality. So I don't know, does that kind of clear it up for you, Annette? Like, do you feel like,
I mean, it's kind of like what Charmaine said in the beginning. It was like a Stepford Wives thing. I mean, either way, you're trying to create something that's perfect in the end. That's basically, you're trying to have everything equal and everything's perfect. Well, if one guy can't hear, or one guy's too smart, so they put a little buzzer in his ear, like some of the things that they were doing, I was like, what? I don't understand.
That is bananas.
Yeah, but I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's just, one of those things that you're like, well, I guess we don't all want to be equal then, do we?
Yeah, because we are, like, I think we all want to be treated equally, but it's like, we're not all equal. We're different. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's like, we all want to be treated with the same level of respect and humanity. But it's like, you can't start like limiting. Yeah, it's an argument that I get into a lot with people who don't understand like privilege and stuff like that. They're like, why? How am I privileged? I'm poor. And it's like, yeah, but you started off with a lot more than a lot of other people did, in the race of life. And so I think, I just made that connection with Harris and Bergeron. That's so amazing, because I think that's why literature, and especially like these classes and stuff, that's why I like talking to you guys, is just because you don't make those connections until you really kind of talk it out with somebody. And I'd never made that connection before. So that's like really bonkers.
I think that makes sense. Like, we want to be treated, everybody wants to be treated equal, but we're not the same.
Exactly.
So we need to respect each other's differences, but still be treated equal, because everybody is not the same. And that what makes the world good, right? You have people teach you things, but we can share things, we can teach each other things, but we all should be treated equal. So, hey, that was an aha moment for me too, after reading that story.
I think it's like, because I remember I went to this like training thing years ago, and it was about the different types of time that you could take off of work. And so it was talking about like maternity leave and bereavement and stuff like that. And there was this woman in the audience who was like, those people get that time and we don't, like, even. And I was like, because you're not bereaved and because you don't have a child, like, like you're not pregnant. You don't get things just for the sake of getting them. We have to give those people that time, because that's what they need at that moment in order to get them to like a functioning level that's on par with you. And it shouldn't be a situation where it's like, well, they're getting something that I'm not. And it's all kinds of ridiculous.
See, but then you think about like people taking smoking breaks well, how come I don't get to take an extra
'Cause you
15
don't
minutes?
smoke!
Right? And I was like,
Stop
maybe that's what she's gonna say.
In that case, I'd be like, okay, you should be able to get like there should be a thing in a policy where it's like you get a 15-minute break, but it's like, don't start.
Well, we call it shelter. I'm operations director of the shelter, and so we do our breaks. We call them fresh air breaks.
Fresh air breaks.
Fresh air,
because you just got to get out.
Breathe a little bit. You were speaking of where you went to a training. It seems like to me she's had privilege in her life.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, it's funny how with some people like that privilege begets just entitlement. You know, it's like I don't want to think about how privileged I am to not, like have to take care of a child or a family member. I just want whatever you got. And if I don't get it, then you're denying me something. And that's why you get like reverse racism announcement. Reverse racism is not a thing, y'all. Look it up. I'm not going to explain it here, but it's like they somehow feel that like to give anybody else something is to take something away from them.
Yep.
Really a stumbling block to progress, because I have no problem with, helping people like welfare. I was on food stamps myself for a while during a difficult time, but I'm not out here saying like, oh, I want it, but nobody else can have it. So, yeah, that's really, God, I never read, thanks guys. I never read Harrison like that. It's like a kind of interesting social justice reading. All right, so let's move on to Mad Max. Were you guys able to watch that?
I did before, so I know the premise, so I can.
Awesome. So yeah, let's start with Charmaine and then we'll move on to Annette. So like, how do you think that this is social science fiction or dystopian science fiction?
Well, the cost to stop civilization, but once again, I think we go to women breeding, and I guess by me being a woman, that's where I land all the time.
Yeah, that's how we read it, definitely. Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about that. Like, how do you think, what do you think Mad Max is criticizing in that moment, like with those characters? Because it's what are they, the wives or the concubines of the main character? I forget. Oh, I'm gonna have to look up his name.
They're the wives.
The wives. What is his name though?
I don't know. I didn't even catch his name, and I watched the movie.
The one he's got like the respirator on, but anyway, like they're his wives and all that stuff. And so, what do you think it's critiquing with those characters?
The different wives.
Yeah, because you were saying that there's definitely there's a part about breeding. Yeah.
Force the wives to be with them to breed. I would think it, and I haven't watched Bad probably in a year and a half, so I'm just going off of my memory.
No, me neither. I need to own it. It's such a good movie.
But I would think once again it's objectifying women because they're only used for breeding. And I know in the movie one of the wives died.
Yeah.
To the next place. So then Max did feel horrible about that because at first he was going to make one decision, then he made another decision because he felt he couldn't protect his child and his wife. So I appreciated that about him, that although they were breeding, he did have some care and concern. Wife and his child.
And the character is I forget who it was, but it's Immortan Joe. That's the guy with the respirator, and so he has all these concubines. And it's interesting because I think you're right. It's definitely critiquing like this idea of women just as because what is it? It's like you have the women as the breeders, right? And then you have the other women who are milkers, I guess you would call them, because they're giving milk. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Annette. What's going on your face?
Yeah, that was it caught me off guard because they just like do a pan of it.
Yeah, like, casually, and I was like, wait, can we go back?
But then when you go back to that truck when they're the monster truck that they're driving trying to get away, and they fill up like, so you're telling me that whole truck is full of mother's milk. That's what they kept calling. Oh, that's mother's milk. And I was like, holy crap, you're milking them.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, it reminds me of, since we're talking about it, it reminds me a little bit of the Handmaid's Tale, where it's like women have these very prescribed roles within the culture. And it's definitely a patriarchal society, right? Would you agree that it's like dominated by men?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And you've got what are they? Oh geez, I'm gonna mess up. But the what is it? He calls them his boys. right? Like all of the
all the little boys running
all
around
the little
like all
boys,
painted white or whatever. I don't.
yeah, they're painted white like death, and like they look like they have skulls,
This was the first
right?
time I'd ever seen this movie, so I kind of was like, what in the heck is going on here? I didn't, like I said, I didn't read the Dystopia until after I watched all this because I wanted to kind of see what it was about first before I made my opinion on what it was. And then when I went back and read it, or the definition, I was like, oh yeah, this is the bad
Definitely
part.
Dystopia. Yeah, they're called his war boys, and so they're the army of the Citadel, and they're his servants and soldiers.
Okay.
So yeah, it's definitely a patriarchal society, and it's interesting how clear they make it about like the consequences of this patriarchal society ruling is basically death. And I love how they kind of like turn it on its head. Like they have the bullet farm where it's like, okay, wait a minute, when you farm something, you're growing something, right? And it's like, no, but they make things that you sow something and you make it dead, right? Does that make any sense? Like a bullet as a seed, almost. I don't know what I'm talking. I got a PhD. Like I think too much. Like I'm taking you to a weird place. But yeah, like it's when you sow something, it's like usually to make it grow. But like with a bullet, you like sow it, and it's like gonna be a dead person. And yeah, like it's kind of like this perversion of the women's world, right? With the mothers that they find in the desert, where it's like they actually have growing things. And so I don't know. It's just. I think it's a really feminist movie. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I thought it was once they actually showed the woman and the separation between the different, like the women land and then the men land. It's like it's kind of barbaric over here, and then you got like we're trying to survive, we're trying to create life. Like that's basically what
they were being badass.
Yeah, like general. We're trying to survive and live off of the land, and then you have the barbarians over here who's hoarding water and giving it to them, and they have to survive off of,
yeah. I don't know. What did you think, Charmaine? You wanted to say something?
Oh no, I was saying the same thing. The definite division and different things that came along with it. It was kind of all over the place to me because I was telling Rado and that I'm not really a science fiction person. So when I watch movies like this, and I think I went with a friend to watch it, I'm just like, oh, it's all over the place. So now I'm digging deep down into it, looking.
I hope you'll give it another watch because I think it's definitely worth it. But it's just so. What I felt when watching it is like I really loved the Furiosa character. For me as a woman, because it's like usually you go to movies. And usually, even if you have like a standout female character, she's going to be sexualized, right? Like, have any of you guys seen the new Justice League movie?
Yes. No. You're talking about Wonder Woman.
Oh, you haven't seen it? If you see it, pay attention to how Wonder Woman is shot in this movie, in the Justice League movie, compared to the Wonder Woman film. Like, there's a bunch of upskirt shots. And I was like, I do not need to see her panties. Like, why are you showing me this? And it's very like male gaze. You can definitely tell a guy like filmed this. And so watching Mad Max, I was just so appreciative because you have Charlize Theron. She's not sexualized, and she's just a very powerful character, but not in any way that cancels out her femininity. Also, she's disabled, which I love because you don't get to see that many disabled characters on screen. And yeah, I just thought I thought that was really amazing. And the fact that it's called Mad Max Fury Road, but it isn't really about him.
No, it's not.
It speaks more to that.
I was like, I was watching it with my fiance. I was like, is this based off of a game or something? Like, I mean, is it all about this guy Max? Like, because he didn't even have to be in the movie. Like, there's no reason.
No, I really love that. I love that it's like kind of, he's there to support the story of these women who are escaping an abusive patriarchal situation. And I remember reading something that the director was saying how it would have been weird if because in one of the early treatments, they were thinking that he was going to take over and like whatever, but it was just going to be weird. Like he was going to have these guys' wives, and like it's just strange. It would have been like way weirder instead
for him to like take charge or something. And then I was like, okay, no, this is about your, the Fiersa, whatever. I was like, this is about her and her delivering them into safety, and like taking one up for the women and like taking a stronghold and saying, no, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to take over and I'm going to make sure that they're safe.
He's the ultimate feminist ally. I really love it.
Kudos to the director.
Yeah, I think definitely kudos to the director, because it's like you don't even get to know his name until the end.
Yeah.
When he's like, my name is Max. And I just love how I think it's because, and I think it's also a critique against toxic masculinity, I think, in the film, because Max himself, he's not this kind of like swashbuckling male hero who comes in to save the women because they can't save himself. He's dealing with a lot of trauma, like the loss of, and I love how we don't even know what it is. Like he may have lost his family or whatever, but he's totally messed up. So he's having a hard enough time dealing with that, and to actually see a male character struggle with something emotionally, I think is very powerful and important for men to see, that you don't always have to like repress it and be the hero. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think he kind of took the back seat on that, and he was like still willing to help them, but I think they were willing to, they were helping him more than they knew.
Yeah, and also you have it with the character of the war boy that ends up Nux. Yeah, who he just is like, he is not living up to the standards of the masculine culture that he's living in, but he's really able to find solace with these women. And it's not like a romantic thing, like he's not kissing anybody or getting into a romantic relationship, but it's like, we're just going to accept you for who you are, because this other culture won't, if you're not a fighter, if you're not going to die on the road, you're pretty much you're disposable, to that culture. And that's why I really love the ending, because the women come over and then they're going to rule it, and they allow the water to flow, like we're not going to resources, we're going to, and there's that one scene where I think it's one of the milking women who like pushes the the lever, and then the water just flows, and it's just like, no, we're not going to live in a hierarchical, patriarchal society where there are haves and haves not, Charmaine, like what you were talking about. We're gonna have it for everybody. So yeah, oh god, I need to go watch that movie again. So yeah, any thoughts to kind of close out our discussion of dystopian science fiction? I know, Charmaine, you said that this is something you really dig and maybe want to dig more into.
Yes, this has been my favorite piece so far. And great that it's dealing with the women. Maybe that was awesome too. I can more relate to it. But I, in this social science fiction, I like how they are bringing issues to the table. They are, and it's funny, like you said, when Margaret Atwood wrote this, and it's still very prevalent today, and it teaches so many situations, and maybe this can be a venue for people to have conversations or really think about, like I said, that's how women are treated, and Congress and everyone's trying to make decisions for women's and rights with their bodies and different things and such, and this all touches on that. And Harrison Bergeron, I really had an aha moment with that, because we're treated equal, but we're different.
Yeah,
and that should be okay to be equal because you're different. So
yeah, I think this is the way really to go about it, to talk about social justice issues, because I think when you try to just talk about it, people get so kind of stuck in what they think, and they're so invested in their own point of view. But if you put it in a story, it's like you just sneak it in there, and they don't have and they don't really have a defense, because they're reading it and they're like, oh, I just want to see what happens. And then it's like, oh my God, like this totally makes me rethink something. Yeah. Did you have any last thoughts, Annette, about social science fiction dystopias?
The social science fiction, I don't have a real in-depth, conversation like Miss Charmaine did, but I think the main thing is that it's probably the closest thing that could be a reality within science fiction. It is the scariest part because all these things, they could really happen, you know? And like, take for instance, the Handmaid's Tale. Like, she went from a normal college life, you know, kid, living in an apartment, you know, living the everyday life that pretty much we all live, to running in the woods and then getting caught. And it's a total takeover of what world really was, you know, the day before. So it's just, I think that's the scariest part. I think social science fiction is probably the scariest because it's the most real.
Yeah, it can happen tomorrow. And I think like, I think more than any other kind of subgenre of science fiction, this is the one that makes me want to do things. It makes me want to like go out there and like vote and like make sure that my voice is counted, because it is just around the corner. It's like, it's not a far cry from what could happen if we continue to roll back protections for women, for people of color, for LGBTQI individuals. And so, yeah, I think that way, in that way, science fiction can be really powerful. Thank you so much for talking with me today, ladies. I love talking with ladies about this. This has been my favorite week so far, and I think it's because of y'all and what you had to say. So I'm gonna stop the broadcast, and then we'll kind of visit after if you have any questions. So bye, everybody.